Hey, how are you?
Janet, my friend Janet.
Janet?
Yeah. There might be hymn books too, so make sure you have I think the middle row, check the middle? Yeah. Let me see the new, yeah. Thank you.
So it's Janet, right?
Yes.
Nice to meet you, Janet. Kevin.
Hi.
So, all right, we're jumping into Ecclesiastes chapter 5. We left off, I think, at the end of verse 9, if I'm correct. And I've done this every Bible study. I'm going to do a super fast run through. We have the author, and he has done it all. He has seen it all. He's lived the life. He's had the greatest wealth. He's had the most money, most material possessions. He has had the most wives. He has had it all. So he's more intelligent than anybody. And he's at the end of his life here, and he's writing this, and he's like, that was all in vain. That was all really just everything that I put my hand to, all the pleasure I sought after, all these things. In the end, the final story is that, man, I have bottomed out. Because one of the things you see in his writings is he said, and I looked and I saw that everything under the sun, and so it's the motif, it's the refrain he repeats over and over again, and everything under the sun was in vain. And so as we think of that, what is his mistake? What's his central mistake? He has blinders on, but they're not like this for a horse. They're like this, and he can't look up, and he can't see God. And so when he can't look beyond this life, he said, I built all these things. I amassed all this wealth. I had all these women and any pleasure that life could afford. I didn't deprive myself of it. And then there are these brief moments where he goes like this, and he goes, and he lifts up. And when he looks up to God, he goes, oh wait, okay, I'm getting my bearing. So some people have a problem with this book. I've met Christians before, they're like, what is it doing in the Bible? And it's understandable, because when you first read it, he says some horrific things. It's like, should we as people of faith be talking like this? But he is just an individual, like any of us, who's just very, very honest. And so I think as New Yorkers, we all like that. I have a little bit of difficulty. I always joke around with my friends from England, because I can just never figure out, they're so unbelievably polite. But as New Yorkers, we're like, say it to me. And that's what he's doing. He's like, you know what? I've had it all. And it was really empty. And so we're going to look tonight at some of his brutally honest statements, and there's redemptive elements in all this as well. So let's start out. Does somebody want to read Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 through 12?
I'll read it. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep.
So if anyone sees anything there, jump right in. A thought or a question, either one.
I always felt like, I wonder how those people with great wealth can live and know that there's so many people out there without. How do they get past that?
Yeah. An interesting thing that's happened in my life, just how God has, the world he's given me, the art world, I've been able to be in the company of some of the wealthiest people on earth. And so I'll never forget, I won't say the fellow's name because this story is too sad, but I was in this room at a party, and he's one of the top, most wealthiest people in the whole country. And I was invited to the party. So I walk in, and it's a Christmas party. So the whole house, we're all spread out, and then there's one man sitting in the middle, and he's got a cigarette in his hand, and there's a curl of smoke coming up. Like, and I was like, who smokes at someone's party at someone else's house? I was like, oh, he does. Because when you're worth that many tens of billions of dollars, you can do exactly that. And this man, he sat in the middle, but there was a clearing around him. So like usually in a party, like there's groups and groups and groups, but there was like a moat around him. And then it was the most awkward thing on earth. Then somebody would go run up to him, and they'd be like talking and gesticulating with their hands, and then he would just go like that, and he would like nod, and there'd be a little exchange, and then that person would leave, and then another person would come up. And so this man's friend walks over, and he's like, well, that's, that individual worth tens of billions of dollars. All the people who are walking up to him are asking him for money. And he was, I'm not just saying this, I'm not like trying to see what I want to see. He was the loneliest person I've ever seen in my life, because nobody was talking to him. So I was there on behalf of a big not-for-profit that at the time I was running, and it never crossed my mind. I was like, I'm not gonna hit this guy up for money. But I knew this man's story. I knew that his son was killed in an accident, in a bike accident, which was so sad. His daughter was killed in a boating accident. And here he is, he's just sitting in the middle of the room, like smoking, and like, my heart went out to him. I don't want to conclude and say, he was the saddest man I've ever, because maybe he just was having a bad party. But from what I saw, that was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. Yeah. Nobody spoke with him, everyone spoke at him. And I went back to my boardroom after that was all over. So it was like a week later, we had a boardroom meeting, and they all said to me like, well, how'd the party go? You met him. And I was like, oh yeah, it wasn't that fun. I kind of left early. Like, well, how much money did you get for us? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, you were the wealthiest man in the whole world. Like, how much money did you get for our organization? I was like, none. And they're like, well, did you ask? I was like, no. And they all got really mad at me. Everyone on my boardroom got really mad at me. I was like, he's a guy, he's a human. He was just trying to have a holiday party. So anyway, that whole idea of how do they navigate life? I think the writer of Ecclesiastes is going to look at it twofold, because we're going to see in a little bit that how do they go through life knowing that there's such need, right? But then how do they go through life knowing that everyone's just viewing them as an object? That's the other hard part. Yeah, it's I actually had empathy for the guy, and a lot of people told me he was actually one of the nicest people, a really good person. I was like, he seemed to be. So jumping back to this whole idea of it opens up, he who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. And one of the most misquoted sections of all of Scripture is, people say all the time, I had it said to me at a dinner table many years ago where somebody said, that's my problem with you Christians. You're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good. And the guy goes, I think money is rather useful, and you Christians, you hate money. And then he goes, and you say that money is the root of all evil. And I just paused, and we all hear, no, the answer is no, the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. And the person, he's like, well, where does it say that? I was like, that's what it says in the Bible. It doesn't say that money is the root of all evil. It says the love of it. And as a consequence, someone who has absolutely no money, they're busted, they don't have 2 cents to rub together, could be more in love with money than a billionaire. It's the Bolsheviks, when they did everything they did in Russia, they killed the family of the Tsar, they just, Stalin after, wiping out tens of millions of people. But the Bolsheviks were really poor academics. Some of them could have been very wealthy, but I just mean, they loved money so much that they just killed the whole royal family, blew out the pillars of the whole entire country, and ushered in one of the worst, almost self-genocidal moments where they killed tens of millions of their own people. And that was all just the love of money. And the single thing that the Bolsheviks claimed was that they didn't care about money. But their actions were louder than their words, right? And so that's what it says here. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money. But now let's turn it on America. I mean, I have no problem saying this. We are there are things about America that I'm just so deeply proud of, and other things I'm so ashamed of. And the hard thing is, in the travels that I've had abroad, just the awareness that we are the wealthiest nation, we are the wealthiest people group that this planet has ever seen. And some people would say, no, the Egyptians are, well, our middle class is enormous. And the swath of our country that's in poverty is minuscule, comparing it to the rest of the world. And here we are, we've amassed all of this wealth, and the thing that's so scary is we're like, like the classic person living in like this chateau on the water. They're on the canal, and they have all the boats in the yard, and they have everything going on, but nobody knows that that person who's in that house has a mortgage on that house for like $7 million and a credit card bill that's getting like in the hundreds of thousands. We're $36 trillion in debt. $36 trillion, and it's just the hard thing. Go for it.
We're at $36 trillion in federal debt. That's what the federal government owes in bonds to the United States Americans. But credit card debt and all the other debt added up is $100 trillion.
Yeah.
Which is an even better number.
100 trillion.
And when we had $3 trillion, if Columbus had bought $65,000, just to understand how big a trillion is, it's just fun, $65,000 a minute every day until today, we still wouldn't have the size of $3 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that big.
It's that big. Yeah, no, that's fantastic, Evan. That is spot on, exactly like the debt that we're living in as a country. And this isn't a Bible study about politics and economics, but it kind of is, because we're insatiable. What does it say right here? He who loves wealth, he who loves money will not be satisfied. We're just never satisfied as a nation. We're also a generous nation, so I'm not just saying like, America's terrible, and I'm not doing that. I'm just saying there's an insatiable element to our capitalistic culture. And speaking to a man from Ireland recently, and he's like the viper that bit America, because we tasted wealth early on in our country, right? He said it's bit Ireland, it's bit the Europe. It's like, and he said these countries that formerly operated on a very like reasonable level within their budgets, they're all overspending like crazy, and we're just, again, it's the insatiability of it. Like, it's not sustainable. And then it says, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Well, actually, before I do that, before going into the futility that the author is referring to, I think it's worthwhile to also point out what happens when people do come into extraordinary wealth, like here in the United States or in Europe. Like, there's a study that was done of 8 people who won the lottery. They call it the football, I forget what they call it, the football pools or something like that in England. And they went back to the 8 people who won a lot of money. This is in the 70s and the 80s. And they sat down with the 8 people as a psychologist, and 5 of them were desperately, like, just in despair. Their lives fell apart once they won all this money. And the culture that's created by like the lottery and things of that sort, its focus is just on immediate gratification, right? And then you look like further into these things, and 1/3 of all people who win the lottery go bankrupt. It's just crazy. But it's the insatiability, and then they pursued it only for what it was. It wasn't the byproduct of building something like noble. You know what I mean? So moving on, when it says, when goods increase, they increase who eat them. I've always wondered if that's wordplay. When goods increase, like they increase who. I think that's literally what it's saying here. I really looked at a lot of translations. And what advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Again, that whole idea of with wealth, there can be, it's not that there needs to be, but there can be a slew of problems that are ushered in that come with wealth. So when anthropologists go on archaeological digs and different fields, when they find in Egypt, whenever they find a a body that's buried and the teeth are all rotted out, they immediately know that likely it was a very, very rich Egyptian. And do you know how they know that? All the poor Egyptians all had excellent teeth. The rich ones had all their teeth rotted out because the poor couldn't afford honey. And the rich loved honey. And so they would gorge themselves on honey in Egypt. And so their teeth would rot out. So it's like this whole idea, again, we're going to get to a little bit the good stewardship of money, but we're looking at the abuse of it. With money comes problems that come from money. It's very interesting that the only places on planet Earth where we have anorexia is in highly developed nations. There is no such thing as anorexia in Ethiopia. It just doesn't exist. So with money, there comes like all of these, and I think that's what he's saying here. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. What advantage has their owner but to see them with his eyes? But now he jumps on, did you have something to say, Evan?
I was curious what anorexia is, but that's when like people don't eat to get thinner, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, it's a disorder that someone just stops eating for, there could be many reasons. It's owing from trauma, but it only exists in societies that have great abundance. It literally doesn't exist. I did a lot of research on it. The New York Times said it doesn't exist outside of like Europe, the United States, places like that, because with that great wealth, there can actually be like a fracturing of our mind. It's really interesting,
So I think sometimes maybe people that aren't focused on petty little things, people are mean and they pick, oh, you're a little overweight, or I think sometimes it becomes a mental thing and then you start to like, you know what I'm saying, where in, countries or whatever, where you're not really worried about those things, you're just worried about getting a meal that day.
That's right.
Not your focus, but we get so much here that we can focus on minute things, I think, I don't know.
I think that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And I mean, just the whole idea of like, I have someone in my life who I knew who was struggling with anorexia, and it came from all girls in her class bullying her. It was horrific. I mean, she was like really, really made fun of. And the girl was like totally thin, obviously, but beforehand she was thin. But like you were saying, like the whole idea of like, focusing on like petty things. The girls around her all focused on such petty things. It was horrific, And fortunately, my friend got out of it. She was like completely healed of it, and she's a mother, and she's got a bunch of kids, and she counsels other girls now who have that. So we had a problem that the author just presented. Now we have another thing. He says, "Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." Does anyone want to jump into that? That's interesting.
I don't know, I just think like maybe the simple life of just earning a living and being honest, allows you to go to bed and close your eyes and be happy with who you are, where it's almost an addiction, right?
Yep.
So it's constant, like, on your mind. I gotta,
Yep.
whether it's like, I gotta have that drink, or I gotta have that whatever, I gotta have that money.
It's an addiction. Yeah.
Your mind continues to spin and you're never really at peace.
Yeah. I think that's exactly it. Where you get caught in these, like, they call them feedback loops, right? And like we call it like habitual sin. But it's like the person who is just working hard, just making it through the day, like to pair the two verses together, like before it says where goods increase, they increase who eat them, and what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eye. There's this whole idea of like you take on a lot of obligations as well when you're very wealthy, right? And then it says, "Sweet is the sleep of a laborer," as we just read, "whether he eats little or much, but the stomach of the rich will not let him sleep." You were just talking about the addiction, right? Well, the Hebrew here, I'm told, especially when they translated it over eventually to Greek later on, but the original Hebrew implies indigestion. Like literally, someone has like dyspeptic, like kind of like an ulcer or something of that sort. And because they've increased so much, their stomach is so full, they can't sleep. Whereas someone who just, a laborer, like maybe he didn't eat as much as he would have liked to have eaten, but he doesn't have all the weight on his mind. He hasn't like gone through everything in quite the same way. And again, I think this could quickly turn into like, oh, the Bible is railing against rich people. It's not. It's the unhealthy obsession with it. That's how like we have to keep on returning to. I think it's so important to always remember Job was the richest man in the entire land, and God said of him, that on the entire planet Earth, there was nobody who was like Job, who loved God, like with his whole heart. Abraham was incredibly wealthy, right? David, at his height, was very wealthy. We have like all these heroes of the faith that were extremely wealthy. So the Bible is nowhere saying like, you're wealthy, you're bad. It's not doing it. It's saying you're obsessed with wealth, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. So I love that idea of like, I love the idea of how the author is always pitting, extremes against each other, but he also is not like yet arriving at a place of, like he hasn't landed the plane yet. Like who's better off right now? Because the poor man is actually kind of suffering as well. You know what I mean? So it's not as if he's saying, oh, it's good to be poor, but what he's saying is, like, let's for a moment recall the story of the wealthy man in Jesus' parable, and Lazarus, who is like very, very poor. So I think that's Luke chapter 16. I can't remember. Let's jump over to that for a moment. I think it's 16. Yeah, Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31. So if somebody wants to read Luke chapter 16, verses 19 through 31.
There was a certain rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. But there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who was laid at his gate, desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. So it was that the beggar died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And being in torments in Hades, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. Then he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are tormented. And besides all this, between us and you there is a great gulf fixed, so that those who want to pass from here to you cannot, nor can those from there pass to us. Want me to continue?
Sure.
Then he said, I beg you therefore, Father, that you would send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may testify to them, lest they also come to this place of torment. Abraham said to him, Well, they have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, No, Father Abraham, but if one goes to them from the dead, they will repent. But he said to them, If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded though one rise from the dead.
Such a powerful story. Does
Yeah.
anyone want to jump into that and have any observations?
Well, I always thought this way. I mean, there was a reason why Lazarus was put before the rich man. That was his opportunity. The rich man could have given and ministered to him. Every day he was there, but it looks like he overlooked him all the time.
Yep.
So it was almost like God put him there as a ministry for him, as an opportunity.
As an opportunity. Yep.
Like like last week you were talking about, money, hoarding it, keeping it to yourself. God gives people money for a reason,
Yep.
to give to others. And the word does say it's better to give than to receive.
Yeah.
I think of that often, even when you're looking to buy a gift for somebody and it's special and you can't, I'll say it first, you receive a nice gift and you're happy and you're blessed, but when you really work together to give a gift, a special gift, it's so much better inside to give. So he does say neither a lender nor a lender be, but only a giver. So
Yeah.
give.
Yeah.
God gives you back.
Yeah. And it's funny, like, do you ever, like, it's like a fun exercise. What did you get for Christmas 3 years ago? Like, do you remember? I mean, I don't have such a great memory for certain things, but it's like, I find it funny, like, sometimes it's mid-January, and I'm like, what did I get for, because my birthday and Christmas are right together. They're like, a few days apart. I'm like, what did I get for Christmas or my birthday this year? I'm like, I can't remember, because like the rush of it's gone so quickly. But you look back on sweet memories in life where you were able to invest in someone else and pour out someone. It stays with you forever, and it lasts, and that just blows me away, like all the
And
time.
selfishness doesn't get any marks in heaven, but the giving does.
Yeah. I love, so this story of the rich man and Lazarus, what's so powerful is, look at the first words. There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. So purple was very, very hard for them to get their hands on. Like, it was like a very rare dye. And so, like, you're clothed in purple. I mean, you are, like, I'll translate it for you guys. There was a rich man who was clothed in Gucci and Versace, and who ate, I don't know, what would you say he ate? He ate, I forget the name of, is it Nobu in New York City?
I think purple was the royal color, so I think that guy was the emperor of Rome. At this point, Rome was at like the height of its power. So the entire Mediterranean, he was the most powerful man, the entire Mediterranean. If I'm correct, I don't know.
Yeah, he would be among that, yeah.
I think he would be.
Yeah, that's really cool. Evan loves studying Rome, and I really enjoy, we talk about Rome for like, so I'm like, I didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
So, like, just starting out right there, at his gate was a poor man named Lazarus. Now, the name Lazarus, this is why I love going into the original languages. So whether it's Hebrew, it's Greek, it's Aramaic, whatever it might be, going to the original word, Lazarus literally means the one who cares for God, or God helps him. Like, there's this like reciprocality, and let me actually get the exact Hebrew on that. God has helped, or God's helped. So like, there's a tenderness. It really implies that God loves this man, and this man loves God. And so again, I've heard this story called before, the rich man who was poor and the poor man who was rich. And I really like that. And so we fast forward, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off, and he called out, Father, have mercy on me. But Abraham said, Child, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he's comforted here, and you are in anguish. It's funny, because people recently, there's just been this spate of, this pattern, especially on social media, where people have been posting about how nice Jesus is. And he's just the nicest, nice guy. He just filled it, and it's like, he has some pretty terrible things to say, and this is one of them. A man would do anything just to have someone dip their finger in water and touch the tip of their tongue with it. I mean, that is a state of torment. And there's a chasm, right, in between hell and heaven. And I just look at that, and I'm like, I'd like to share the story of Pastor Gary Skinner. I think I have his name correct. I should have his name correct. So Gary Skinner was, if I get some aspects of the story a little bit wrong, forgive me, but I've read his story, and I had his story told to me by people who are friends with him. In the 1970s and 1980s, Uganda was in horrific turmoil. And so there's a pastor in Canada, and he just hears about, there's just rolling waves of like genocide and dictators and Idi Amin and all these like just horrific killing fields where nowadays they go to a field to farm it, and they just find hundreds of skulls just in a pit. Like, just the horror of what was taking place in Uganda in the 70s and the 80s. There's a pastor in Canada, and he says to his wife, I feel like we need to go to Uganda, and I feel like we need to just somehow be a part of helping. They had 2 young kids. Unbelievable. They moved to Uganda, and they started a church. And there's rolling waves. I don't need to go into the specifics, but just civil war turmoil. And this pastor would go from the house where he was living, like in this little shack, across town to the church. And all the way to the church, there would be hands reaching out, just begging him for money. And he would get to church, and he would preach his message, and he'd go back home begging all the way back. And he said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. Like, he had a good heart. He wasn't like cruel to the kids, but to get from A to B, like, you had to like kind of ignore them. He's like, I can't do this anymore. We have to start an orphanage. And his wife obviously would have been like, we're in Uganda, there's civil war, like tanks rolling down the street, different things. And now we're going to open an orphanage as well as this church we're running. And they open their orphanage, and they take in 1 kid, and they take in 2, and then they have 5, and then they have 15. And through the years, he just kept on faithfully serving in Uganda. They were the headquarters of the military wing of the government, where they would torture all their political prisoners. And they said literally the blood would flow out the front door into the streets and run down the streets from all the torture that happened inside of the building. The pastor went to that building when one military group knocked out the other military group, and he went to that building and he said to the military, he said, "Do you guys have use for this building?" Like, "No, we're kind of done with it." He said, "I'm going to buy it." And so he pulled the money together. It's a massive building. I've been in it in Kampala. And he said, "This building where all the death occurred, it was a theater turned into a torture chamber, is where we're going to have our church." And that is where Watoto Church is to this day. And so I'm standing in this church. There's thousands of people worshiping. There's thousands of little kids all over. And then we would go up deep into the mountains, and I was invited there by Bradley Bichelle, the worship leader, my friend, to paint portraits of women and children in Watoto. And so I wasn't there to really do anything. I was there to tell the story of the great things that God had done. Pastor Gary Skinner, like, if you look at it in one way, he was a pastor in Canada. He's not that wealthy, but he knew one thing. If you're from Canada, if you're from the United States, you're among the wealthiest people that ever walked the earth. I'm literally one of the wealthiest people in the world. And he had that mindset. And that's what Jesus is like talking about here, where he says, like, you had Lazarus and you never reached out to him. And last week we read about that amazing story of the steward of the account books, who he messed with the numbers in order to secure favor with people around him. And what's the point of Jesus' story with that parable? And it's actually the first part of Luke chapter 16. What's the point of that story? Jesus says, it's not about money, it's about securing relationships. When you get to heaven and somebody walks up to you, a little boy is going to walk up to Gary Skinner, and he's like a man now, and at the height of Watoto, where it is now, Watoto Villages has 3,000 kids in it. And when you speak to the leaders of that church, they're like, "Oh, we're just getting started. We're in our infancy. We want to have more villages, more villages." But again, when they get to heaven, 3,000 kids right now, all growing up and going out into the world, into Uganda. They go into all Ugandan society. I mean, what is Gary Skinner, Pastor Gary Skinner, what is he going to see when he gets to heaven? It's going to be the opposite of this story of the rich man and Lazarus. It's going to be the flip of it. But to wrap up, what's difficult about this passage is he says, go send someone to my brothers so they don't have to come here. And he says, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead. What does that mean? Does anyone have any guesses? It's so powerful.
About himself.
What's that?
He's talking about himself.
Yeah, he's talking about himself.
People don't.
Yeah. And so, like, I've heard from people before, there are people in my life who have had something they prayed for, a fantastic thing happened, and it faded pretty quickly, and their love for God faded pretty quickly. Like a major healing of someone who I knew, and their heart just went cold towards God. And God's like, no, even what Jesus is sharing here is, even if you have these sensational signs from heaven and there's clouds part, people forget. And if they're going to ignore the Old Testament of the Bible, even Jesus rising from the dead won't even mean anything to them. So it's like an exhortation to us, like, love the Bible. And then you won't forget the most important thing. So let's jump back again to Ecclesiastes. So, but the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. Let's read verses Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 13 through 17. If someone want to read that?
I have seen a grievous evil under the sun. 13 through 17.
Yes, please.
All right. Wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, or wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there is nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they carry in their hands. This too is a grievous evil. And as everyone comes, so they depart. And what do they gain, since they toil for the wind? All their days they eat in darkness, with great frustration, affliction, and anger.
If anyone sees anything there, jump in.
Well, for me, the verse where it says in 16, what profit has he who has labored for the wind? So, I mean, you labor for yourself, you're laboring for the wind, really. And it's all about others and for the Lord, for his purpose.
Yep.
You can lose it anytime. And there's really no satisfaction if there's no giving in it. Because self-centeredness is a whole in itself, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, so exactly that. The self-centeredness of this individual's pursuit, right? And it says, a grievous evil that I've seen under the sun. Well, one of the characteristics of riches, of wealth, is, man, it can just disappear quick. I can't tell you the number of times in the art world, someone like I'll look at someone, I'll be like, wow, that person is like really set. And then another person, like 6 months later, they're like, no, that's like a shadow empire that they're over. Like that wealth actually all went belly up with the Madoff scam. I know many people who lost everything with the Bernie Madoff scam, you know, and that's what the author is here saying. He says there are those who lost money in a bad venture. So like they made poor business decisions. They invested with Bernie. And then the other aspect of wealth that's difficult is sometimes it's no fault of your own whatsoever. The Von Trapp family, you all remember Sound of Music? So they were in Austria, and they were among the wealthiest families in all of Austria. And then the bank that all their money was in collapsed, and they lost 100% of their wealth. And it's just so interesting, like you can just do everything right, and wealth can still just evaporate overnight. And that's what he's saying here. And then he's a father of a son, but he has nothing in his hands. So it's like you're expecting to pass all this wealth on to your children, and now it's all gone. And you know, I look at this, and sometimes I feel like at this moment we're living in America, I don't want to be apocalyptic because God never spoke to me and said, America is going to have a financial collapse. I've never, but financial collapses have happened before. And we all have to ask ourselves, like, who are we like? Like, who are we like? Are we like Job, or are we like his wife? So with that, let's turn to the book of Job. It's just a couple books behind. So it goes Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. So it's just a few books backwards. Let's go to Job chapter 1. And I ask myself this on a regular basis. So if somebody gets to Job chapter 1, I'm going to quickly talk about Job's life to fast forward through right before what we're going to read. Job is a righteous man. He's walking before God with a good heart. And Satan says, you know, Job doesn't really love you, God. He just loves you because of all the good things you shower on him. And so it's a horrific taunt. You can see the heart of what's going on in the cosmos and the whole universe is that Satan is mocking God and saying, those little creatures that you made, they don't even care about you. It's how wrong. It'd be like somebody coming to me and saying, oh, Margaret doesn't really love you. Your wife doesn't love you. She just loves you because going to say, like, you gave her a nice house, and I'm not saying I gave her a house, but like, you gave her a nice house, you gave her nice cars. If you took all that away, Margaret would divorce you in a heartbeat. God's like, how about that? Okay, why don't you try that? And so that's what we have right here. Everything was taken away from Job. All of his children died. All of his money was gone. Again, he was the wealthiest man in the land. Everything was wiped out. He's covered eventually with boils and things of that sort. Everything has been destroyed in his life. And so does someone want to read Job chapter 1, verses 20 and 21?
Then Job, somebody gonna read?
Yeah, I'll read it.
Yeah, go ahead.
You read it.
No, go ahead.
Job 20, okay. At this Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground and worshipped and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord have taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.
Go ahead and read verse 22 as well.
Okay.
I just love it.
In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing.
I mean, right there, imagine losing everything in your world, all your children, all your possessions, everything is gone in a day. And what does he say? The Lord gave, and the Lord taketh away. And blessed be the name of the Lord. To be able to say that. So who are the only people in life that are able to withstand horrific loss and financial loss? The only people who are able to do that are the ones who say that God gave it in the first place. That is what the writer of Ecclesiastes is kind of like coming around to. It's like, if, one of my worst songs, I think a lot of people love this song, but I do hate Frank Sinatra's song, I Did It My Way. Like, we all like it's a cliche in Christian circles, but it really does vex me. I also don't think it's a great song. But anyway, but it's like, I know so many people, especially in the art world, they were like, I did it. I built it all. It's all mine. And someone in my life, I no longer am connected to this person. He built a huge financial empire, had a huge corporation, and his corporation just started to do this. And as it was going down like that, the man unraveled psychologically, fits of rage, and I eventually just had to walk away and say, I can't overlap you anymore. This guy was psychotically possessed with his money. Why? Because he would always brag when he was in dinners of what he built. I built it. I did this. My dad was a chicken farmer, and I came to this height, and I'm the head of this publicly traded corporation, And as the corporation was going down, he just unraveled, because he couldn't say, if you can't say the Lord gave it, then when it is taken away, you fall apart. But if you say, everything that I have, everything is from God. And so if God gives me someone in my life, and then for his reason takes that person away, well, I can handle that because I know that God is good. I'll grieve. I'll walk with a limp for the rest of my life. But God is good. He gave thank you for the time that I had to be with that person. Thank you for the time that I had with all that money, Did you have something?
No, I mean, my son just last year lost his best friend. We got a neuroblastoma cancer.
Wow.
And he was like a 2-year battle, but he finally, did die or whatever. But I was like, it made me it's weird because I was working, I just kind of come to faith in the past couple of years, and I was just like, saying to myself, God, why can't you take it away? But it's like, I say to myself, would my son, my son Aiden, would I rather him not be born or have him those 20? And I'd rather have had him those 20 years. You know what I'm saying? It's just
great attitude, yeah.
I mean, it's just like the joy and all the stuff. But I mean, would I still want him? I mean, he is still, but I'm saying it, my son,
Sure.
But it's like, and I that's why a lot of time I'm trying to work on my faith with things like that, because it's like, Job just not being, he wasn't angry at God, I mean, maybe he was, I'm just saying, but he wasn't going to say bad things about him for what happened.
He wouldn't.
It's
he wouldn't say bad things.
I try to think of that in mind, how would I have dealt with what these parents dealt with, and it's just the fact that I would rather have gone through the joys that I had with my son up to that point.
Yep.
And, you know,
Yep.
remember, but it's just, yeah,
It's a great way to go through life.
yeah.
Just, hey, I'm grateful for the time I had with this person. Just yesterday morning, I got a message from my friend's widow now, he's a man, he was 60 years old, and I would go and visit him at his bedside because he was dying of cancer. And I drew his portrait while he lay in the bed, and I gave it to his wife. And his wife yesterday messaged me. She said, Joe's gone. He passed. And like, I cried. I mean, I was sad. He was my high school art teacher. I loved him. The guy was a nut job. He was a total maniac of a person. Like, do you remember hearing about Mr. Camarado? Total nut job. But he had a heart of gold. And as I'm like crying, and I'm just like parked at the docks, I was just like, God, thank you for the time I had with him. He's 60 years old. I wish we had him to 100, but thanks for those years. And my heart was still grieving, but there was like, somehow there's a simultaneous like thing of like appreciation and grieving. The grieving didn't go away, but I'll be playing fiddle at his funeral on Friday. But anyway, that whole idea of Job, what you're saying, thank you for the years that I had. Thank you for the money that you allowed me to enjoy, with my family. All my money's gone, and everyone here has heard this story. Maybe not everyone. I lost 100% of my income at the beginning, before the lockdowns even hit, because I had to walk away from something that was bad. It was really dark. And I lost 100% of my income. And then I moved my family to Europe to start over. And then we're stuck in Europe, and COVID is shutting down the entire planet. And then we come back home, and I have no income, and the art world is collapsed, galleries all shut down. And I just said to God, I was just like, thanks for giving me those good years in the art world. And what's next? You know what I mean? So let's jump over to Job chapter 1, verse 9, 10, and 11. 9 and 10. So Job chapter 1, verses 9 and 10. If anyone wants to jump in and read that.
So Satan answered the Lord and said,
Oh, I'm sorry.
no.
Chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. Sorry about that. Yeah, sorry.
Then his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we indeed accept good from God, and shall we not accept adversity? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips.
Yeah, and the word evil there can also be read as disaster. I mean, the heart of Job, like, one of the things that psychologists say that just mentally destroys people is bitterness. And just like, you took this from me, God, and so I curse you. Like, people have cursed God, right? And when I lost everything 5 years ago, and my whole art world totally just imploded, I was driving along and I said, God, I remember this like so clearly, as clear as day, like, I love you. I thank you for those years. And as I said before, what's next? But there's a sense in my heart of almost like a box that went like check, like, okay, you didn't curse me, you passed. But it was like a special moment. And I was like, yeah, can we accept good things from God and not also disaster? That was a true disaster. But I was like, it's from your hand, God, and so I accept it.
Yeah, it's like, you see the disasters that go on, earthquakes, tornadoes, and and then you think like, oh my God,
Yeah.
I feel so bad for those people. But it's like, it's just, when any disaster happens, it's like, everybody wants to help and they want to do the thing, and then we forget, like,
Yeah.
then we go back to like, the kind of, like I just said, just like things that aren't as important, and just kind of
That's right, yeah.
about all that,
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying in the good, but it's like, it's almost like these bad things happen, I don't know, to make us, have empathy or
Sure.
whatever, but sometimes it doesn't work for everybody. Sometimes it just kind of fades away.
Yeah. And I think that's, something that I could just say, my pastor, from years through the years, Pastor Kevin Hennessy at Calvary Chapel, he had such a heart always to reach out and to minister to people that were in need. He didn't go all over the world. He went to 2 places on the globe. He would go to Uganda to help an orphanage there, and he would go to Ukraine to help an orphanage there. If somebody gave him the most incredible offer to go elsewhere, he wouldn't take it. He's like, I can only be a steward of 2 places beyond my immediate church. I mean, he did stuff here in the States a lot as well. But the whole idea of like, there's an ongoing disaster in Ukraine, like the area where he would go to is absolutely like sub-poverty, like, or whatever, worse poverty, I should say. But he was able to build an orphanage. You know what I mean? It was just so beautiful. And he had the heart of Jesus, where he was just like, I'm not going to forget Lazarus. I'm not going to forget that. Just like for us, like the challenge is like, yeah, keep this at the front of our minds. You know, like as Christians, like God wants to use us, and it doesn't have to be abroad. That's not the point of any of this. It could just be in our own backyard. You know what I mean? So let's jump back to Ecclesiastes, chapter 5. And let's read, someone read verses 18 through 20.
I can read it. This is what I have observed to be good, that it is appropriate for a person to eat, to drink, and to find satisfaction in their toilsome labor under the sun, during the few days of life that God has given them. For this is their lot. Moreover, when God gives someone wealth and possessions, and the ability to enjoy them, to accept their lot and be happy in their toil, this is a gift of God. They seldom reflect on the days of their life, because God keeps them occupied with gladness of heart.
Yeah, and then why don't you read also chapter 6, verses 1 through 6.
Oh, all right. I have seen another evil under the sun, and it weighs heavily on mankind. God gives some people wealth, possessions, and honor, so that they lack nothing that their hearts desire. But God does not grant them the ability to enjoy them, and strangers enjoy them instead. This is meaningless, a grievous evil. And man may have 100 children and live many years, yet no matter how long he lives, if he cannot enjoy his prosperity and does not receive a proper burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. It comes without meaning, it departs in darkness, and in darkness its name is shrouded. Though it never saw the sun or knew anything, it has more rest than does that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice over, but fails to enjoy his prosperity. Do not all go to the same place?
Yeah, so the reason why we read, like, you know, the 2 paragraphs there's a sequential thread, you know, that the author is weaving here. He's talking about the dangers of money, right, early on. Like, okay, like, it can actually bring harm, right? If it's handled incorrectly, it could disappear. It could disappear by your own fault or other things. And now what he's saying is there is actually a good place, a sweet spot to arrive at. And what is that? And it's just called contentment. And, you know, we read that in the New Testament. Now, godliness with contentment is great gain. And I love that. And he's talking about, you know, there's the negative, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. That's a bad thing. But there's another type of, like, eat, drink, and let your heart be satisfied. And just, like, don't reach beyond, you know what your station in life is. And I think of Dave Ramsey. I'm grateful to be friends with a man who works with Dave Ramsey in his financial planning, like, corporation. And Dave Ramsey's entire life mission is to basically, figuratively speaking, just take bulldozers and just run MasterCard, Visa, and all, like, the credit card companies. Like, he just wants them gone from the American financial system. Because he said it gives Americans the sense that they can live beyond their means, and it enslaves them. So that's what Dave Ramsey, he has saved so many people from their homes are collapsing in the sense of divorce and just heartache, and then they stop, you know, living in a way that they're extending beyond their own means, and they're content with what they have, and then they start building, and then they amass wealth, and then they can invest it wisely. It's kind of like what I see right here is like, it's almost a Dave Ramsey moment for me, where it's like, there is the possibility to eat and drink and find enjoyment in the toil with which one toils under the sun. So after we read, you know, that first verse 18, Let's jump over to chapter 6, verse 1. There's an evil that I've seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. The ability to make wealth is a gift from God. The ability to enjoy wealth is a gift from God. Not everyone has both. And boy, oh boy, have I seen this. Oh my goodness. I want to put it in the positive first. I know many people, again, I go back to the art world, they've generated great wealth and they really enjoy it. Like, they have fantastic lives. They're all characterized by being extraordinarily generous people. And they just, like, I don't know, they have great families, they travel, they like, and then just everywhere that they can, they're just investing in other people around them. But now I'm going to flip it. Evan, you watched the end of Citizen Kane, didn't you? Have you guys seen Citizen Kane? It's the old classic movie, Orson Welles. It's modeled after Hearst, the media newspaper tycoon. And do you remember the end of it? Do you want to share what happens to him, like in the final?
So I didn't see the very beginning where he dies. But do you mean the scene where, like, you're going through all the possessions?
Yeah, like, just, he slowly unravels. He basically dies in a castle that he's built for himself. He hates everyone hates him, and he just dies a miserable death. Like, that's like somewhat of the story of Citizen Kane, where he put all of his hope and all of his everything into just amassing, and then he was used by other people. And so the movie, like, I didn't watch the final portion of it, but it's a lot like this right here. A person who amasses all this wealth and yet doesn't even have the capacity to enjoy it. And he's saying, it's just cruel. And he says, in fact, it's so bad to get to the place where you amass all this wealth and you can't enjoy it, that you'd be better off if you were like a stillborn baby that died before it even tasted this world. If you just went from obscurity to obscurity. Because it's worse to get to this place where you have all this wealth and you can't even enjoy it. And he's speaking in firsthand right here. And he's like, it's just a horrific lot in life. I mean, that's a lot right there. And I think as New Yorkers, I think we probably see this in our part of the country more than other states in the United States. Like, in any of our travels, you could say, like, you'll go to a region, an area, and it's just like, people are a little bit more content.
Putting it in perspective in my life, it's like, when I was younger and I had kids, I lived with my mom, husband and I were separated, and I just wanted a place to be. Just an apartment, rent something, just to live with, not to live with my mom. And then eventually I did get that. I had a house and I was able to rent it, and it was like so fulfilling. But then all of a sudden it was like, well, the neighbors own their house. I don't own this house. Like, and so then, we were able to buy the house. It was like, well, it was a gift, but yeah, like, okay, now we need a new kitchen. The kitchen's like one.
Yeah.
But so, like, in every day, you don't have to be wealthy to really want things.
Yep.
It's part of life, and it's like, I wish I had my kitchen. Oh, my friend had a kitchen. It's beautiful.
Oh man, I'm in that moment right now. And I have to check it in my head.
And then I have to wait and stop. And sometimes I hear myself, wait, what happened when you just wanted a house to rent?
Yeah.
I have to take myself back a lot.
Yeah.
And just be grateful, like, every day, like, wow, I'm lucky. I'm really lucky.
Yeah. It's so true. Just like,
blessed, I shouldn't say.
just being grateful. I'm lucky. I'm really lucky. Like, I park all the time at St. Mark's docks over here on the east side. And when I pull up there, I'm like, this is waterfront property. I mean, I don't own it, but I get to use it every morning. And I see all the bulkhead around me and nobody else is sitting out there. And I'm like, I sit in the back of my truck on a sunny day, sun's beating down on me, the birds are all dipping into the water. I'm like, I don't own this waterfront property, but I get to use it all the time. Like, I'm very grateful.
And it's worse when you own it.
Yeah.
There's no way to fix anything.
You got to replace the bulkhead.
Then you have something to lose.
Yeah.
Because now I have everything to lose.
Yeah. And that whole idea, I think so we've touched on a lot of things between Lazarus and the rich ruler and stuff like that, and I thought it'd be fun to wrap it up. I'll try to make it quick with a little bit about this painting right here. So Mama Janet she's just one of the most incredible people. Mama Janet lived in the outskirts of Kampala towards like the rural areas, and Mama Janet, this is years before I met her, she was living in a cardboard hut, and she's in this cardboard hut. She is in a relationship with a man. They have 4 children together, and the man just abandons her. And like that's like, I don't want to say it's a death sentence, but it's close to it in Uganda. I mean, this is the poorest of the poorest of the poor in this area. And so she living in cardboard, and they have string up to hold cloth to create walls. And there's a fire, and a fire breaks out because they will run raw electric sometimes, and a fire breaks out, and she loses her son. And it was just like the most heartbreaking thing you could ever hear. And so all the people in the village, like everyone's like, oh my goodness, like Mama Janet lost her child. And so there's this thing if you go through something bad in like cultures that aren't Christian, where oftentimes these cultures that are rooted in like kind of like I'll just say not a Christian mindset. They said maybe the gods don't like you. So then a few years goes by, she's grieving, she's having a hard time. She said it was just hard to make it through a day. And somebody empties out their kerosene right next to her rebuilt cardboard house. Second fire breaks out a few years later. She loses another child. And she said all the villagers then shunned her because she was cursed by the gods. And so she was like on the outs. You don't go near a cursed person. Her grandchild was also caught in that fire. And the grandchild all his flesh was like burned off. So she's telling me this story. I'm painting her portrait in this little room right here. And she's telling me the story in Swahili. And I have a translator who's translating for me. And I kind of like thought to myself, I was like, are they pulling my leg? Like, come on, this can't be true. And a little boy walks in, and all of his skin was all like, almost like a Hollywood makeup. Like it didn't even look real, but he had the most beautiful eyes and the biggest smile. And he just comes and sits next to me while I'm painting her portrait. And Mama Janet goes, and I just wanted to give up and I just wanted to die. And then I grieved and I grieved. And she said, she couldn't go on. And then she said, I called out to God. I just said, God, please, like if you're there. Watoto Church heard about this woman who had these terrible things happen to her. So the church came and they said, hey, listen, we want to take you to a grieving class. So you're in trouble because you're grieving. If you don't grieve properly, like it could be the end. And she was like, okay, but I have no way of affording the bus fare to get there. And they said, we'll drive to you. We'll pick you up, take you into the city, come to our church. We'll drive you back. They're like, you don't need to be a Christian. We don't want any money from you. That's it. So Mama Janet, she would go through these grieving classes, and eventually she came to know Jesus. And she was just praying. She said, God, I just place my trust in you. So here's the church pouring out into her. She's getting built up. She's getting built up. And then the church started to teach the women in the community lessons in business, where they would give like advice on how to open a checking account, how to do different things like that. And the women are very, they're under the boot of the men. The men have their boot on their necks, like so to speak. So Mama Janet is being taught all these different things, and she's growing, and she's just holding on to hope. But like to just make it through the day and get food for her children was like almost impossible. And then she has a few businessmen arrive at her little piece of property in the countryside, and they said, we've done some triangulation. Your plot of land is the best spot in the whole entire valley for a cell phone tower. And so we're very excited to tell you that we will give you $400 to buy your land from you. And she goes, and I paused and I thought, and she was saying it in Swahili, she's like, I paused and I thought and I prayed, and then I went back to them. And she goes, and I said to them, you can rent my land for 10 years for $10,000. If I have that number wrong, I'm really notorious with like remembering numbers exactly. Maybe it was 8,000, maybe it was 12, but it was like her offer was there, and she said, but you can't have it. And they went back and they were like, deal. So she went from being the woman who was cursed and hated by the gods to the woman who trusted in Jesus to the woman who has a cell phone tower on her property. So I'm there, and she goes, now come with me. She goes, I will show you my investment. She went out and bought hundreds of chickens. She has an egg selling business. She built that structure she's standing in. She was so deeply, healthily proud. She built that structure, and in that structure, she rented it out to all other businesses in the town. And she's turning the spot she's standing in, she's turning it into a beauty salon. And she goes, here I will make, I'll do the hair for all. And she was holding herself with such dignity. And it's like, this woman lost everything. She had all these businesses. So now Mama Janet is now known to be the woman who is blessed by Jesus. And she now has a ministry where she reaches out to Ugandan women who have had something horrific happen to them. And she also does business coaching. In the poorest area of Uganda, she is the success story of success stories. But it's like, we don't need to always wait for heaven to see these beautiful things. Like, God can do these things like here and now, you know what I mean? And then it's also gonna be in heaven, But I've gone over, I'm sorry about that. So with that, we'll close with the word of prayer. Lord, we're so grateful for your word, dear God, and I pray that you'd help all of us to be like Mom and Janet, Lord, that we would just look to you no matter what happens in our life, Lord. And Lord, like Mom and Janet, that whatever does come into our life, Lord, that you'd even just show us how to enjoy it, Lord. That we could then give back to others, Lord, as you would have us do, Jesus. Help us, Lord, not to lay up treasures here on this earth, but help us to build up treasures in heaven, Lord. In your name we pray. Amen. Sorry for running over. I didn't realize it.